I always thought my family was normal, or at least as normal as any other. Mom, Dad, and I lived in a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood just outside Boston. Our place was the kind where every street corner brought back childhood memories, where every neighbor knew your name. Mom worked as a real estate agent while Dad was an accountant. He worked long hours, but I always knew he was doing it for us. Growing up, I was closer to my dad. Maybe it was because he was always so patient, or maybe because we had that same dry sense of humor. Mom, on the other hand, was a bit more unpredictable. Sometimes she'd be sweet as pie, taking me out for shopping sprees or baking cookies together. Other times she was distant, like she had her own secret life. But what I didn't know then was just how dark that secret would turn out to be. It was a chilly November night when everything started to change. I was up late studying for finals. I could hear Dad snoring faintly from his bedroom down the hall. Mom was on the couch in the living room, glued to her phone. I had this weird feeling, like when you can just sense that something's off. I tried to brush it off as stress from school, but then I heard Mom's voice. It was low and hushed, but the tone was unmistakable, flirtatious. "Don't worry, he'll be asleep soon. Just come over," she whispered. I froze in the doorway. Who was she talking to? Dad was definitely asleep, and Mom didn't have any guy friends, at least not that I knew of. I crept a little closer, trying not to make a sound. My stomach knotted up when I saw the way her face lit up with a mischievous smile. A million thoughts ran through my head. Maybe it was just a friend or some harmless joking. But why did it feel so wrong? I went back to my room feeling restless. I couldn't study, not with that nagging suspicion eating away at me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the front door creak open and close quietly. Someone had come inside. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know. I tiptoed out of my room. Heard kept replaying in my mind over and over. What were they planning, and why did it feel like more than just some sketchy affair? There was this part of me that just wanted to pretend everything was fine, to hope I was wrong, but deep down I knew I couldn't ignore it. Dad deserved to know, but I needed more than just my gut feeling before confronting him. I had to find proof. The next morning, while Mom was out showing a house, I took my chance. I searched everywhere, in her purse, in the kitchen junk drawer, and even in the laundry room. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to give up when I noticed her phone sitting on the kitchen counter, left behind for the first time in forever. It was risky, but I knew I had to look. I grabbed it, fingers trembling as I typed in the password she always used. My birth date. It worked. Her phone unlocked, and I quickly scrolled through her texts, my heart racing. Most of it was harmless, just messages from clients and the usual mom stuff. But then I saw a name that made me pause. Mark. I didn't know. The TV humming quietly in the background, when I finally spoke up. "Dad, can I talk to you about something serious?" My voice was shaking and I could feel my face getting hot. He looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing with concern. "Of course, honey. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told him everything, about the messages, the late-night visits, and what I overheard. I showed him the pictures of the texts. The look on his face was a mix of disbelief, anger, and a kind of sadness I'd never seen before. It broke my heart. "Why would she do this?" he murmured, almost to himself. "I don't understand." I didn't have an answer. I didn't understand it either. All I knew was that we needed to act quickly. We agreed not to let on that we knew, and Dad said he'd call a lawyer the next day. We also considered going to the police, but without knowing the full extent of what Mom and Mark were planning, we didn't want to risk tipping. She was shouting, insisting there had been some mistake, but I knew better. As I watched Mom being escorted to the police car, a strange numbness settled over me. It didn't feel real, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The officers were talking to Dad inside, but I couldn't bear to go back into the house just yet. The memories of what I overheard, the fear of what might have happened if I hadn't called for help, it was all too much. The police interviewed me and Dad separately, asking us to recount everything. What I overheard, the texts, the late-night meetings. It was all so surreal, and I kept worrying they'd think I was making it up. But as I handed over my phone with the pictures of the text messages, I saw the look on the detective's face shift from skepticism to a kind of grim acknowledgement. They knew this wasn't just some kid trying to get attention. It was real and it was serious. A few days later, we got more details about what had actually been going on. It turned out Mark wasn't some random guy Mom had just met. He was a former client of hers who'd recently gotten into some financial trouble. Apparently, they had started seeing each other about a year ago, and things quickly escalated from there. The texts were only the tip of the iceberg. Police found evidence of more elaborate plans that Mark and Mom had been working on to make it look like Dad had a medical accident in his sleep. It was a twisted way for them to be together and possibly even cash in on Dad's life insurance policy. The trial was a nightmare. Seeing Mom in the courtroom looking so put together in her lawyer's suit felt like a punch to the gut. It was as if she was trying to play the part of the victim, the loving wife who would never hurt a fly. But when the evidence was presented, there was no escaping the truth. The texts, the hidden financial records, and the testimony from people who had seen her with Mark, it all painted a picture of a person I didn't recognize. Dad sat next to me during every session, his face pale and drained. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. It was like the years had caught up to him all at once, and I hated Mom for what she'd done to us, for how she'd shattered our family and turned our lives upside down. But I also hated how, despite everything, I couldn't entirely shut off the part of me that still loved her. The hardest part was testifying. I had to take the stand and recount everything in front of a room full of strangers, while Mom sat there, staring at me with a look that was somewhere between anger and sadness. I couldn't tell if she hated me for turning her in or if she was just sorry she got caught. I couldn't even look her in the eye. It didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. Guilty. The judge handed down a sentence that would put Mom behind bars for a long time, and I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. She was going to prison, but that didn't change the fact that my family was broken, and it wasn't something that could ever be fixed. I'd lost my mother, not to death, but to something even more confusing, a betrayal that cut so deep, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to forgive her. In the months that followed, Dad and I struggled to find our footing. We moved to a new house on the other side of town, away from the memories that haunted us. It wasn't exactly a fresh start, but it was a step in the right direction. Dad started seeing a therapist, and I began attending counseling sessions at school. It helped a little talking to someone about the anger and confusion I felt. One day, out of the blue, I got a letter from Mom. It had been months since the trial, and I hadn't heard a word from her. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to know what she had to say. But curiosity got the better of me, and I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The letter was full of apologies, explanations, and excuses. She claimed that she never really intended to go through with it, that she was just caught up in the moment and couldn't see a way out. She wrote about how much she regretted everything, how she still loved Dad and me, and how she hoped that one day I could forgive her. But her words felt hollow. They couldn't undo the damage, couldn't erase the fear and betrayal I'd felt. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to forgive her, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let what happened define the rest of my life. I folded the letter back up and tucked it into a drawer, out of sight but not entirely out of mind. There was still a long road ahead for Dad and me both, but we were stronger than what she'd tried to do to us. We were survivors, and even though it felt like a scar that would never completely heal, it didn't have to define who I became. Mom made her choices and I made mine. In the end, it was my decision to stand up and speak out that made the difference, and I wouldn't regret that for a second.